Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the entertainment editor over at Polygon and someone who writes a whole lot about comics and Lord of the Rings, but mostly comics. It's Susana Polo. Thanks for coming on, Susana.
Thank you so much for having me back.
So last year we talked about trends and the big things that were happening or we were expecting for the year in comics for 2021. We're going to talk about 2021 again, but I want to start with how the year was for you. How's it going? Like, how was the year in comics and Polygon for you? Was it a good year?
It was a good year. And I think it was a year for me that was defined kind of like by branching out from comics, but in the same way, like building muscles that let me come back to comics and do that same kind of stuff. I've been getting a lot of, my big reach as an editor for the year was doing a 52-week series on Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies. And really what we came away from, obviously, like, I think I did one comics piece for that, and it was a piece asking the question of why there's never been a graphic novel adaptation of The Lord of the Rings, which is, we couldn't really find an answer to it. It was just, there's never been one because there's never been one. But it was a huge learning experience, and it was definitely a case of like figuring out what formats work and what kind of stories work. I'm always like, I don't know, this is like very indie, like inside baseball, like journalist stuff. But you're always looking for not just like, how can I cover news? It's especially for me, when the job that I have is to talk about comics to an audience that I know, most of which is not reading comics. My job is to figure out interesting and innovative ways to get them to look at the stuff that I'm writing.
Yeah.
So finding out just like, oh, this format works, this question is interesting. Here's how to edit something. Here's how to workshop a pitch until it's something that like even people who don't care about this are going to click on. And yeah, I'm not doing a big project like that this year, and I'm looking forward to taking all that stuff that I learned and putting it back into covering comic stuff this year.
Whatever you learned that got you to running a piece about how Legolas got onto the horse in the Two Towers, do that again, because I love that.
Yeah. No, we've been talking. I've been spending late Q4 and early Q1 talking with a lot of comics PR folks about like, what are you doing this year? Like, what do you want to blow out? What do you think is going to be huge? And how can I put it on my website and make it look really pretty? But also, how can I do it in a way that like anybody wants to click on it? And a lot of the stuff I've been focusing on is things like that are not unlike doing an expose on why Legolas had to get on the horse that weird way and how the digital effects team did it. Is going like, people like to see stuff, but then they also like to know how it got made, especially if there's an interesting story and how it got made. And Polygon's very good at putting pretty pictures on the website, but if we can also tell someone an interesting story about how something got made, like that's usually pretty interesting to people. I think there's so much out there that's like, here's what's going to happen. Here's 6 pages of a book. Here's, the official solicit, and we're out. And if, and if you have the time and the manpower to go, even just like just get a couple of quotes and throw it in there. I think one of my favorite comics pieces that I put up this year was, this totally serendipitous, like I'm reading, is it Legends of the Dark Knight? The anthology?
Yes. The one that... was it like a digital one?
Was it Shadows of the Bat or whatever it is?
I don't know. There's so many Batman titles, it's hard to keep track of them sometimes.
I'm beating around the bush, but I'm reading my preview issues for the week, and I'm like, holy shit, Tim Drake is queer now. Like, oh my God. And so the very first thing I did, 9 a.m. Monday morning was email my DC contact and be like, hey, I have these 3 questions for the writer of this short story. If they can turn it around by Tuesday morning, I will include this all in a piece about it. And it's one of the biggest comics pieces we did all year. And I was extremely proud of it because Robin is queer now is a headline that anybody is going to run with. But we had the quotes from the creator, we had the background on the character as to why this sort of like fit in for him. And we had good art, and we had a description of what happened in the comic, and that like comes together into something that like not only are you like capitalizing on everybody who's Googling, wait, Robin is queer now, you are also like attracting attention just for like having the whole story and having the best version of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the keys is if everyone is doing things one way, you have to find the way to stand out, and like that's a good way to do it. It's like you're the one that had the quote from the writer as to like the rationale behind that and like how it came together and things, and that's, I don't know. I always think that you want to add something to, if you're going to do one of the stories where it's like everyone's going to be doing the story, you have to give people a reason why to share yours and why to read yours and everything like that. So good job by you.
Thank you.
We're here to talk about, last year you were on to talk about 5 things we were looking forward to in 2021. So today we're going to look back on 2021 and we're going to look forward to 2022, talking about 5 trends or ideas that stood out and also that we're looking forward to. You tackled 2021, I tackled 2022. There's going to be an overlap there, but let's start with your list, which is a great, robust list for us to talk about. Is there one you'd like to start with in particular?
I think we should start with the biggest one, which is I listed a few things and then I realized they all sort of fell under the same umbrella, which is just labor in comics. And I had a big conversation with like 3 or 4 of my other coworkers in December when we were like, do we need to do a year-end post about labor in the entertainment industry in 2021? And we eventually decided, no, there are too many differences between like the Image Comics union and like the Yahtzee strike and like unionizing in tabletop gaming and growing labor consciousness in the AAA games scene. And so we decided not to do it because that post would just be a general labor in 2021 post, and nobody is actually going to read that, even no matter how much love we put into it. But I was listing like the Substack deal, and a ton of creators like moving over to Substack to do weird and interesting things, and the Image Union, and creators just in general taking 2021 after the upheaval of 2022 to find ways of being self-sufficient. That it's all like it is all a part of. It's a thing that is happening generally in society at the moment, and it's not lost to comics. And I think that's something I think one of the biggest things that has been happening in comics this year, in a way that like it's still very unclear like how that is all going to shake out. And I think it's certainly, we've seen pushes like this in comics before. We've seen the self-publishing boom, and we've seen Image is going to be 30 years old this year. And just because we've seen it before doesn't mean that it isn't a new wave that could go in a lot of different directions, and has been interesting to follow.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting to see it too, because I mean, we're recording this on Friday, January 7th, which means that yesterday the Image employees actually voted 7-2 to approve the union, which is, or whatever the phrasing is for union. But anyways, it's going ahead. It's been, and then on top of that, there's also like, it's been really interesting to see. From my perspective, it seems like all this stuff, no matter what your position, whether or not you're employees of Image or if you're a creator or whatever, what you're trying to do is you're trying to make comics and a career in that field more sustainable for you and also more satisfying for you. Because I know a lot of people glom onto I forgot what item number, I think it's number 9, the part about we want to in the Image Union thing where we want to look at the content and make sure that it's not abusive or hateful or anything like that. People glom onto that, but I mean, really, it's just anybody who works in any industry doesn't want to put their name on something that they don't personally support. And so it's just, I think all this stuff is about building sustainability of self and also sustainability of career. And that's hugely, hugely important going forward and in last year. I mean, I think you're dead on. I think it was one of the biggest things from last year for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, just to go to your point about, editorial like differences that like, yeah, we have the Vox union has a clause like that in our contract about, you just, at a certain point you can't, bosses shouldn't be able to force employees to work on stuff that they have like ideological differences from, and that goes for the entire spectrum of what that could possibly be, and that's exactly the kind of stuff that like that unions do. I don't know. I've been following the like back in the last time we had an in-person San Diego Comic-Con, I went to a great panel about the history of unionization efforts in American comics, and how they have been sort of variably stymied here and there and fallen apart in other ways. And I don't know, as a person who like started being an online news-ish writer in like 2011. And now, and in that era was like, wow, like, wouldn't it be nice to be in like a writers union or like the Writers Guild or something? And then, but like, where would we pick it? It's online, ha ha ha. And now, now I'm in one of the largest. I was there for the whole process of becoming one of the largest digital media unions in the country, and it's the kind of thing that I would love to see happen in the medium that I invest so much of my time and energy in. I would love to see that kind of protection and solidarity come to like these creators that I've been following and value their work so much for so long, and really like anything that helps comics creators like be more stable in their careers, like or just in their jobs, like the difference between a career and a job, like that, I think that's worth fighting for and it's worth supporting. And, certainly like there are always going to be questions about like, well, like what, like how long is the Substack deal going to last? And what are the long-term repercussions of that going to be? And is this, which of these opportunities are really for like, is this a rising tide lifts all boats, or is this like people who have a name and an audience are getting cool deals from cool people? Does Kickstarter work for everybody? Is there Kickstarter just work for people who already have an audience?
Right.
But in general, like, when in a labor market where people have more choices about what they can do in order to be self-sustaining in their work is one that makes me very excited.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting about the Substack deal, and now it is worth throwing out the caveat that people have a lot of issues with Substack based off of who they choose to bless with Substack Pro deals on occasion.
Absolutely, yeah.
And understandable complaints. But at the same time, one thing I think is really interesting about Substack is when you look at the history of comics, it's filled with deals with caveats, with like basically it's like, you look at Siegel and Schuster and you look at Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons and things like that. And everyone's like, just why can't people get paid to create and do what they do best? And like, this is actually one of the rare occasions in which, near as I can tell, and according to every creator that I've talked to that has made one of these deals, it is a bucket of money that they get to do whatever they want with. Basically, their sole job is to attract people to the platform, be a billboard, and they can spread that money out however they want. And the interesting thing is like there's a lot of different directions that can go. I mean, like when you turn a creator into a publisher, I mean, I don't know if you're following Jonathan Hickman's one, but it seems like every couple of days there's like a new artist that they've brought onto the project. And I'm sure they're getting paid really high rates because if I remember correctly, like Hickman said something along the lines of, maybe it wasn't Hickman, but somebody said something along the lines of they have enough money from this deal that they can pay people at or above Marvel and DC rates as an independent person. And like that type of thing has, near as I can tell, never existed in comics before. The type of control that offers creators and the type of spreading of the wealth that they can offer to their peers. Now, granted, is it going to be advantageous to be a friend of Jonathan Hickman or James Tynion because of that? Or like a creator that they like? Yes. But at the same time, it is kind of the ideal deal in comics because they keep their IP and they get to do whatever they want. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, we can't I don't know, I have not been very good at reading books in the pandemic because I'm just constantly trying to keep up with comics. But I did read all of the Marvels this year. And I think one of the most interesting things that Douglas Wolk has to say in that book is talking about how American comics, pretty, well, I don't know, maybe limited it to superhero comics, but they have always underneath, or not even underneath, just alongside the vaunted, on the page principles of superhero comics, they have always been a commercial enterprise. Mm-hmm. They have always been bound by capitalism and just sometimes, just naked, we're making a She-Hulk because we want to trademark it,
yeah.
we're
doing Secret Wars because we want to sell toys.
Yeah. We're making Captain Marvel because Superman's really hot right now. And that has always been there, and that is one of the most fascinating things about long-running superhero comics. And I think that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, and there's also no ethical paying your friends under capitalism, and there's no ethical taking Substack money under capitalism, and there's no ethical working for the big two under capitalism. And it's all none of it is certain, but it is all very fascinating to watch. And if that paying people money to do cool shit is to do the cool stuff that they want to, and letting them own it is a good deal, and it's a good deal for them. And I think hopefully an ideal turns out to be, when these projects come to more of a fruitive state, turns out to be really productive for readers too.
It is really interesting to see all the different things that are kind of, because Comixology Originals is a really interesting part of this too, because Comixology mm-hmm. Originals, I don't know all the details on the deal, but from what I understand, you own the rights when you do that, and you're getting paid up front. Now, I know some of the stuff gets noisy because it's how do you make money off the comic you did on the royalties front if the vast majority of the platforms people are reading it are free? And so it's just that's a little wonky, but a lot of this stuff that's popping up, and it seems like there's more coming down the path. There's something new called Zest World that was announced in late November, and I mean, an amazingly weird name, but at the same time, I know that they're kind of getting into the space. It's going to be really interesting to see how some of this stuff continues, and if it starts to turn, to use a very dramatic phrase, nefarious. The further mm-hmm. you get into it, and so far, it's been very vaguely, reasonably idealistic. It could turn really quickly. But I do want to say one of my topics for 2022 that I was going to bring up, and I figured I might as well bring it up now, is I think it's going to be really interesting come August, which is when the first deals were announced with Substack. Is everybody going to stick around? Because the Substack Pro deals last a year, and then after that you're just making subscription money. So does that prove to be an effective enough platform going forward to keep people on that platform? Or is it just basically a one-time only infusion of a whole bunch of cash to some creators?
And even then, spending a year being super independently creative is still,
amazing.
That's a thing people, college professors take a sabbatical to go write a novel. That's a year in Europe, that's creative fuel. That's, there could still, people leaving Substack doesn't necessarily, I don't know, I'll come and say it. I don't really care whether Substack makes money out of paying a bunch of comics creators stuff. I do care about creators taking that money and doing cool stuff with it. And I think that folks leaving, if folks leave Substack after a year, my feeling on that is going to be haha, yeah, take it.
Take your money
and
run.
run. Exactly.
No, I totally agree. I mean, that's the most important part. But I do think it is interesting because it's I think there's a version of this in which it proves to be another sustainable platform for people to operate as comic creators that supplements their income. And if that proves to be true, that I think would be a good thing in the long run. So it will be interesting to see that, but at the same time, get that bag and get out if you have to.
Yeah. Go over to Patreon or do whatever, you know.
Do whatever you want. Exactly.
Erica Henderson's Patreon was like a major source of dopamine for me this entire year. I just love her stuff. I love her art. I love her reading her talk about like comics language. Just ugh.
Honestly, like Erica Henderson's everything, like her inventiveness with like making outfits and masks and stuff like that is just like astonishing. It's just like, I had Erica on to talk about Dracula Motherfucker, I think the year before, and basically at the end of the podcast was just being like, I wish I was as good at you as at life as you at life.
No, I remember that. Yeah. Erica Henderson makes me want to learn to sew. Like, now she's embroidering, and I'm like, shit.
God damn it, Erica,
all
you're
I do
too
is
good.
cross stitch.
The other thing I like, the other trend that comes out of this, or thing that I'm paying attention to, is it will be really interesting to see both what comes from the Comic Book Workers United, the Image Comics Union thing.
Absolutely.
Going forward, because obviously, I mean, I don't know if you saw the Hellcop #3 thing where all of the union members were removed from the masthead in the Shadowline issue. Yeah, and so it's just like, it's going to be really interesting to see now that they have to move into like the negotiation phase. Mm-hmm. But then, I mean, the real thing is like, this is the first step. It's like, where does this go from here? And it could go nowhere. It could go a lot of places, and it could take forever to go anywhere. Like, you know, it can take a very long time to negotiate a union contract. Yeah. I mean, that's the tough thing is I know a lot of people advocate for all this stuff. And frankly, I'm going to be honest. I don't know, like, the bulk of what I know about unions is from movies in which they vaguely talk about unions. Sure. But I don't get the impression, as you noted, that they're quick. And so it's like, no. It's going to take a while. Like, I mean, I'm a big baseball fan, and right now they're in a lockout, and like they're having this like labor negotiation. People are like, why isn't anything happening? And they're like, because this is what happens with labor negotiations. Yeah, I have a buddy who just finished negotiating his first contract at his place of work, and it took them 3 years from ratifying their union to getting their contract ratified. So it can take a very long time. And I think it's totally reasonable for someone to not know about the inner workings of unions in America right now. Like we haven't done a lot of talking about that stuff or putting that stuff out there. That's one of the things, honestly, that like I hope that I've read, that I read here and there, people posit, and that I hope is actually true, is that the visibility of like media unionizing over the past 5 years to a decade has helped. Like when reporters unionize, we talk about it. We talk about it publicly a lot. And it can make it visible for other folks. And visibility of it just helps it happen more. But that's getting away from things. And now, a quick word from one of off-panel sponsors. Macroverse is a next-generation digital comics platform, and one with an astonishing number of comics, with currently over 50 series from over 100 creators on their app, with a 5-star rating both on Apple and Google's app stores. Download the app and binge all their titles, including the Eisner-nominated Remind from Jason Brubaker, Lisa K. Weber's Hex 11, which has been described as Harry Potter meets Blade Runner, or the new queer supernatural adventure series Husk that launches on November 1st. It's just $4.99 a month to subscribe to Macroverse, with proceeds directly supporting the creators on the platform. Keep an eye on the future of Macroverse too, as 2022 is going to bring an epic upgrade that offers a new level of digital collectability and more, with early adopters able to sign up for more information at macroverse.com. And now, back to the show. So let's talk about one of your next subjects. Yeah. You want me to pick, or you want to pick? You pick. Let's go to... What should I talk about next? I'm going to go to the end. Okay, tokusatsu is maybe getting its Western deconstruction, at least in comics. I presume this is related to like Ultra Mega and, well, I would say Kaiju Max, but I know that I'm like a one-person like endless advocate for that book, and I don't know how many other people. David, don't worry, I'm not gonna leave Kaiju Max out of the party. Thank God. Thank God. And I know whose podcast I'm on. And this might be, disclaimer, this might be me completely out of my lane because I'm not someone who knows a ton about tokusatsu. But it felt this year, I don't know, there were a few years ago,
it just felt like there was a real like mini renaissance of like 20 and 30 something creatives who'd grown up on Sailor Moon and like Madoka and Cardcaptor Sakura, like getting put in charge of things and doing the Western version of deconstructing magic or girl tropes. We got Steven Universe, Bee and Puppy Cat was around, like She-Ra is basically a magical girl show. And this year it felt a little bit to me like I was watching that start to happen in comics for people who'd grown up on Super Sentai stories and grown up like somehow getting their hands on like Ultraman and really like falling in love with like Godzilla and all this stuff and coming to mainstream American comics and just deconstructing the genre in their own way and doing stuff that they wanted to do with it. And I love that stuff. I love watching that kind of cross-pollination. I started watching My Hero Academia a few years ago because I was like, man, I want to see how other people do superheroes. And One Punch Man to a certain extent. I watched a bunch of episodes of One Punch Man to be like, is this really the superhero satire that everybody tells me it is? No, it's really more of an anime satire, but it's doing it with like superhero language. I don't know. Anyway, it might be completely outside of my lane because I do not have a background in basic tokusatsu stuff, basic kaiju stuff, basic Super Sentai stuff. But it has been really interesting to watch like Radiant Black explode. And to look at Ultra Mega and see this mix of like Sentai, kaiju, but also like American like body horror comics sort of collide. And also post-apocalypse, like spoilers if you haven't read the first issue of Ultra Mega. I have not read Kaiju Max because I've never found a good jumping on point. But if you would like to talk about, if you'd like to bring that into the discussion.
Well, depending on your flavor, start with the first. The beautiful thing about Kaiju Max is it's just seasons. So it's like if you get the first trade, it's just the first full season. Or you get the hardcovers, which is the 2 seasons at one, and there's only going to be 3 total hardcovers. So bing, bang, boom. But I do think it's interesting, though, because I think one of the things that people haven't realized, like if you're somebody who pays attention to comics, I don't know if you would look at like Boom's Power Rangers books as like kind of a big impact on the recent years. But I bet if you look back on it, I bet that book was way bigger for Boom than people really realize. And I think it started a lot of careers that are a lot bigger. I mean, like who started in Power Rangers? Dan Mora, Simone DeMeo, Danielle Di Nicuolo. I mean, like, those are 3 really big artists who are making a big impact. And then Kyle Higgins went off and did Radiant Black. And, like, Kyle had been doing stuff for a while. It's not like he was just Power Rangers. But I think part of the reason why Radiant Black can become as big as it is, like, Power Rangers primed the pump for that to do what it did. And I think that, like, it's weird. It's like, I think you could look at that as, like, this starting point for this trend. Even if it is like for some people are just like Power Rangers, what the hell? That weird stuff that used to be on Fox back when I was a kid. I don't know, but do people say that? Maybe they do.
I don't know. I know too many nerds. I think my acquaintances are saturated with people who are like, oh yeah, Power Rangers. Like, you know, they use all the fighting footage from a specific Japanese television show, and then they just hired American actors. Blah blah blah. Like. In the same way that I would expect most of the people that I know to be aware that Voltron is not a real anime. But yeah, no, I think the Power Rangers comics are absolutely a part of this, and the extent to which, like, I don't know, we're going to get to the idea of
spread.
Yes, of like creator spread coming out of a specific comics phenomenon, and one of my other bullet points of 2021. But yeah, like that's always fascinating. That's a fascinating thing to watch that I think happens a lot. We observe a lot more in in collectively creative media that involves more creators. You see that in film where you talk about like creators coming out of like, you talk about like everything that happened after Jodorowsky's Dune failed and like the people who met each other on set of that movie. And
Alien.
then they went on to, yeah, to make all of this like really intense stuff. And they got like really creatively charged and just like redefined science fiction. And everybody talks about, the effect that the Adventure Time writers' room had on the rest of American animation, and to a lesser extent, like Flapjack, because a lot of those creatives came from the Misadventures of Flapjack. But following those kind of like creator family trees can be a really interesting way at looking at creative development in mediums, and I think. I don't know, I'm getting ahead of myself, but we could just talk about.
Do you want to jump into that one?
Here. Yeah. So I was going to talk about, when I was making my preliminary list, I was like data pages. I want to talk about data pages and about how like Nubia and the Amazons has data pages now. And, Kieran Gillen was like, oh, we're allowed to do this now? Eternals is full of data pages.
Yeah.
But what it really is just it's the influence of the new X-Men era percolating out into other comics. And it is also the creative folks who came into that really close-knit collaborative creative space, going out, use it both springboarding off of that, because now people know their names and they know that they're good at what they do, and so they're being hired to do other stuff. But also coming out of that really in like creative like mix and crucible and that experience, and taking all the stuff they learned there and taking it other places. I'm really, the Trial of the Amazons is coming up at DC, and I really want to dig into that and like talk to everybody involved in it. Because in my dream about it, my dream is that the folks on the Wonder Woman umbrella, which is a wild thing to say, that we even have a Wonder Woman umbrella right now, because it's literally the first time that there has ever been more than 2 Wonder Woman books, and the second time there has been more than 1 Wonder Woman book. But I'm really hoping like these books, when you're reading all of them, it's like these books feel like they are all world building in the same direction, in a quiet way that isn't about like top down editorial edict, but is about these creators all talking to each other.
Right.
And that's a style of comic book superhero storytelling that I like. I came in the late Denny O'Neil era of Batman. That was my door into comics in an era that was extremely like, we were doing Bruce Wayne Fugitive and all these these crossovers that ran through all the series, and that you could go back and read the books like leading up to when they started and be like, oh, everybody here is like on the same page. Everybody here knows where the group is headed and knows where this event is going, and it's not like everything's gonna grind to a halt and we're gonna do Joker War, or we're gonna do something else. That these, you can see like everybody in the group laying seeds for what their characters are going to be doing in a crossover, and that stuff is so hard, but it's so cool. It feels so good as a reader, and that was all over. Obviously all over the lead up to X of Swords, and I'm really, I don't know, this is like a combo 2021 and 2022 thing, where 2021 is where I feel like I'm seeing the seeds of the creative explosion of like the dawn of X Diaspora, as all these creators go out to do other stuff, and also other people come in and are like, I want to get in on this, like Al Ewing is like, I have to be doing X-Men books, and Kieran Gillen, they finally tempt him back and be like, you can write Sinister again. Come on. And then like creators like Vita Ayala going out and getting down on Wonder Woman and being like, yeah, we're just gonna blow this out, like we're gonna world build. I don't know, I think I tweeted this when when Hoxpox was coming out that I was like, I need someone to do this for Themyscira.
Yeah.
Like I need someone to come in and update this concept in a way that it like just like shake off some of the dust of this idea for a more modern idea of what an island full of all-female immortal warrior philosophers can be. And like that's what my fingers are crossed for, like watching what the folks who come out of the X Slack do once they take all the stuff they learned in there and also the collaborative methods that came in on that and bring them out to other areas of the collaborative mercantile world that we call superhero comics.
I do think it's interesting because you both have like that spread, but then you also have like James Tynion admitted that he was trying to emulate what the X Office was doing with the Batman books.
Mm-hmm,
and then, but you even look at like Nice House on the Lake. Nice House on the Lake has data pages. I mean,
yes.
Yeah. I mean, and
you're absolutely right. I forgot that.
It is fascinating to like when I had Kieran Gillen on the podcast recently, we were talking about Immortal X-Men, and like, it was one of the things I thought was a good point by him is like, he's like, I did data pages before for Wicked and Divine. And, you know, and like you talked to Jonathan Hickman and like he was really emulating like Legion of Superheroes, like back when like Keith Giffen was on the book. And like, so these things were there. But the interesting thing is before they were positioned as like this radical thing that Keith Giffen does, because Keith Giffen's just whatever, he does his own thing. And like, or you do it on creator owned because it's like, it's the one place you have control. But now it's like, Kieran told me he's trying to think about how can he apply the ideas he learned in his creator owned stuff to the Marvel stuff, like with Eternals and everything. Like this isn't like something that's easy to emulate, but I actually think the narrative voice in Eternals is something that could be studied and taken into other places too. Like the machine and everything like that. And like the way it's used within the language of like editor's notes and things like that. I think there's some really fascinating stuff done there. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that, you know, say what you will about the X-Men books in its current state, but I do think that there's a lot of positives that can be gained from the writer's room element and a lot of the ways that they use the data pages for exposition, but also for personality. I mean, like my favorite, like I actually think like Al Ewing Sword in general has had some really fascinating wrinkles to the data pages and stuff. And I don't know. I'm totally with you. It's going to be really interesting to see where this goes from here because there's a lot of very exciting, useful things that could happen from this if the big two is kind of accepting of them. And it seems like they largely have been.
Yeah, I think the revolution in data pages in Hoxpox and the Dawn of X was that they felt diegetic. Like they felt like a part of the story instead of something that just like was kind of supplemental. You know, like if you really want to talk about data pages, we can go back to Watchmen.
Right.
Right. You know, and also that they're just stylish. They look good.
Yeah. Good design is a good part of this too.
Yeah, and just like I feel like people leaned into design in 2021. And I really enjoy it. Like I enjoy a good logo. I enjoy a good, you know, just a cool look. I love, you know, it's nice to see people playing around, sort of in the bits that aren't drawings, you know, and just making something that looks good.
I think in some ways, some of this ties back to the first subject where it's like the creators going self-sufficient thing, where I think that like we're seeing better design across comics, at least in part because A, it's started to be valued more, and B, there've been like little support industries that have kind of popped off where you have like independent designers like Tom Muller, who's obviously doing amazing stuff. But then on top of that, you have like Sasha E. Head and like Jared K. Fletcher does all the stuff for TKO, and TKO stuff always looks really good. And it's interesting to see the advent of that as like the value systems in comics have changed, both in superheroes and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, you know, it's all like, you know, we talked about if you give creators money to go do whatever they want, they wind up doing intensely creative things. And I think about it, like even if those creative things don't maybe don't work, or they leave Substack after a year, or like that it can, maybe you don't care about it because it's not X-Men or it's not Batman or it's not, the
Kaiju
comics
Max.
that you're buying every day. Yeah, exactly. But those creators will come back to the stuff that you like, and they will bring everything that they learned from it. And you will get better comics.
That's a great point.
And you will, or even if they don't come back to it, people will pick up what they're doing and start doing it in their own stuff. And that's good. Like a health, like that's like it isn't just like there's the health of the creators themselves, like argument to things, but then there is also the just the health of creativity in the industry. When you are making comics in all these different ways, you wind up finding the coolest, most creative stuff and bringing it back to, what we think of like the most rigid, most like predictable, most mainstream stuff will start getting some of the good juice as well.
Yeah. Do you mind if I jump in with one of my 2022 things?
Nope, go for it.
It's related to this. So I wrote a piece on Sketched about this subject, and it's something I've been kind of talking about with like retailers and a number of other people about how Marvel kind of is in a position, especially over 2021 and 2020. And a big part of this is the pandemic, because Hickman admitted on my podcast that they had to basically extend storylines and like the X-Men to basically stretch, because they're like, we want to make this work. And so it pushed out some of the stuff that they were planning on doing. But I do think that one of the problems with Marvel is in a bit of an odd place where they feel so decentralized for a shared universe. It's almost like instead of islands, they're an archipelago of individual like elements that don't touch. And it's really weird. That's an odd position for Marvel to be in, especially after when you look at, depending on your perspective, like the run from like when Bendis started New Avengers with David Finch to like, let's say Siege, that was a really strong period for cohesion for the Marvel line. And that doesn't really feel as if it exists in the current state. And I think, and this is just me guessing, I feel like you don't bring the Avengers and the X-Men and the Eternals together for an event unless you're planning something big after it. So my question is, for 2022, will Marvel bring a relaunch with new number ones? And will that be necessary? I don't know. I mean, what's your perspective on that? Do you feel like Marvel's kind of in a weird place right now?
I was thinking about that because one of my bullet points for 2021 is just talking about like the state of DC. I was trying to like characterize the state of Marvel, and it just feels like Marvel now feels like pre-pandemic Marvel. Like, things that, it's great. Karen Gillan on Eternals is,
awesome.
Fantastic. The X-Men books are chugging right along. I'm really excited for stuff like She-Hulk. Spider-Man feels exactly the same. Donny Cates is Donny Cateson over on the Hulk, just instead of on Venom. You're right. There's something. It's not that I think that there's maybe anything like, it's not, I'm not here to be like, oh, like Marvel's, going out of tubes.
Yeah, no.
That, I'm not here to be like they're doing really badly right now or whatever. Like, but it feels like business as usual at Marvel, which is an interesting thing to say at this moment in time when every other aspect of the comics industry in America is doing weird stuff and going strange places and trying new things.
Yeah. I mean, I guess to their credit, like the weird things that they're doing is stuff that they're outsourcing to others. Like, yeah, like went to Scholastic and released some books through them, and then they have that partnership with Abrams Comic Arts where they're doing the Alex Ross graphic novel.
And they've got these podcasts,
right? The narrative podcasts
that are apparently really doing well.
Susan Sarandon's in one of them?
So yeah, so well that they're doing spin-off comics based on them. Like they have a podcast that's loosely based on the Old Man Logan setting
Right.
called Wastelanders, and they're doing spin-off comics for it that are in that continuity and not in the like quote unquote official Old Man Logan continuity. And but like no, but like that's they're doing so much stuff that feels like invisible,
Right.
that feels just like completely outside of where everyone is looking, just like outside of everyone's peripheral vision.
I think that's what it gets down to, though. It's like, so there's a lot of comics I really like at Marvel right now. Black Widow's really good.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I gotta say, I wrote this up today. I really love the current Venom run. That's a phrase I have literally never said in my entire life. But Al Ewing and Ron V are doing really interesting things, and Brian Hitch drew the most interesting cat I've ever seen in my entire life in the second issue. Anyways, and it's a good book. John Ridley and Juan Cabal and Black Panther is really good. There's a lot of really interesting stuff out there. But I had a retailer ask me, it's just like, what is the Marvel book that people are talking about? Or like, what's the one that's really drawing interest? And it's like, it's like a combination of invisibility and silence. And that's an odd place for Marvel to be, as like what is quote unquote one of the big two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I have conversations with my editor periodically because I do a weekly series where I sort of figure out, what are cool things that happen in comics this week, and I figure out one that would make the best headline for Polygon's audience, and I try to put it up there, and every now and then he'll look down all of my headlines and he'll be like, why do we never talk about Spider-Man? And I'm like, because everything that happens in Spider-Man takes 3 paragraphs to explain. Like I need you to take me at my word that and it's sometimes things fall under that. I don't know. There's another extremely hilarious moment where I think it was during, God, what was that? What was that Marvel crossover? It was a few years ago. It was a Infinity Gem based.
Oh God, Infinity Warps? Where they crossed over and
it happened at the same time as Infinity Warps, but the Infinity Warps is like the spin-off crossover.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Right, but my editor was like, so what's going on in that this week? I was like, Loki collected all the Infinity Gems and so I guess that happened. And he's like, that sounds like we should write about that. Should we write about that? And I'm like, okay. I'm like, no, we shouldn't. And he's like, why shouldn't we write about that? Loki has all the Infinity Gems. I'm like, so like they're the Infinity Gems from another universe, but they won't work in our universe. So he had to bring them somewhere else, and he tricked a bunch of people into I was like an entire 60 seconds into trying to remember what had happened in the comic and explain it to him at a point. He's like, okay, I get it. Okay, we don't have to write about it.
You're making my brain hurt right now.
I was like, and then Loki wound up in the primordial rock of the universe, I guess, and Celestials are there, I think, and I don't
Do you remember when Wolverine was apparently appearing in every comic because I think he was trying to collect Infinity Stones too, and then became the Phoenix? I was just like, what is happening?
Became the Phoenix at the end of time. That ruled, actually. Actually, what I keep thinking of, because I keep looking at the cover of we're just lost now. We're on a complete tangent. I keep looking at the cover of whichever one comes first. X Lives or X Deaths this month. I keep looking at the cover and being like, man, remember when Wolverine had hot claws?
Oh my God.
What happened to that?
I was literally just going to bring that up.
What happened to that when Wolverine fell out of space and he had hot claws afterwards, and then we just all decided not to mention that ever again?
To spoil my own work, I have actually tried to put together the oral history of hot claws. I want to tell it just to find out what happened. And I imagine it would end with Jonathan Hickman being like, I didn't want to do that, so I just deleted it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And now, a quick word from one of Off-Panel's sponsors. That sponsor's Bad Idea. Bad Idea paid for the sponsorship, but they won't give me anything to promote since they're over. So here I am, saying the name Bad Idea. Contractually. I have to. That's it. Bad idea. Their thing, I guess. And now, back to the show. Let's move on to the DC side, because that was one of the things for 2021, which I'm going to say it. I love your phrasing. Feels like DC spent the whole year getting sorted, and that's fair.
Right. I think everybody, all the comics companies underwent upheaval in 2020 with distribution and but I think, and all of them had to figure out, like how they were going to get through that, whether they were going to pause. DC found new distributors. Marvel eventually found new distributors, or a supplementary distributor.
And it's going so well too.
Yeah. But DC also, and everybody felt pressure, and everybody, had layoffs, but DC really, like, their editorial structure entirely changed in 2020. And I feel like 2021, well, like, all you have to do is say, like, future state. Like, they began the year with 2 months of putting continuity on pause, and being like, here's some stories that, like, might be things that happen this year. And a lot of them were really interesting, and a lot of them turned out to actually be things that did happen this year. And once all that stuff started actually cropping up in comics, it's like, why didn't you just say? Like, why didn't you just say this is a preview of stuff that's going to happen later in the year? And that just, like, it felt like this was a year where DC started moving in, like, sort of continuing from 2020, where, like, compared to Marvel, DC was really the company that was like, we are not going to sit around while this happens. We're going to create 2 entire distribution companies in order to get around this problem.
And then it's going to be survival of the fittest, and Lunar will survive.
Yeah. And I think this year was still very much like a editorially rocky, just like, quote unquote, DC bullpen situation, where it wasn't really clear who was going to be here the entire year, and maybe some people were going to leave, and jobs were sort of uncertain, and also you had a lot of people in their jobs for the first time. New publisher, new editor-in-chief, new editor, new group editors, and we're in a state right now where it's like, even the person writing Batman might not be there for very long. And it feels, but at the same time, DC's done a lot of sort of like, let's try new stuff. Like, I'm still waiting for the rest of those Webtoon series to be announced, because if you start with a like low key Batman family Webtoon, like, what else do you have? Oh my gosh. What else do you have for me specifically? Mm-hmm. If it's not a Bat family, a comedy Bat family Webtoon. But yeah, like, the stuff that has come out this year it's been this interesting mix, I think, at DC, of really interesting, like, innovative new stuff. Obviously, Black Label's still chugging along. We finally got Wonder Woman Historia. We've gotten more Hill House comics, and we've gotten these inroads into Webtoon. But there's also some stuff that just sort of feels like we're, like, treading water feels like derogatory in a way, but, like, we're getting settled. Like, we're also putting our feet down in the stuff that we know we're good at, and we're going to figure out, we're like moving along a little bit, and then we're going to, like, in order to get a good foundation to, like, flourish in the new ways that the company is going to flourish under its new management.
Yeah.
I think the blossoming of the Wonder Woman series to me feels like an early, like, indication of, like, somebody finally going, like, yeah, like, there is an audience for Wonder Woman stuff. I love that the core Wonder Woman book has had an all ages backup in it for, like, all year. That's so good. And yeah, just things like that, like keeping Harley up at the fore, and the Pride, like the Pride anthology is like, it's an incredible comic. That there was just this mix, and I think that it's easy to look at what DC is doing and to see sort of like, yeah, this is what the big two do. They, like, this is all stuff that is on trend lines that were starting in, like, 2018 and 2019, of, like, young adult graphic novels and Black Label, and keeping a Batman book going, and a Superman book going, and a Suicide Squad book, because those are the movies that are big. But I think there's also just there's an extent to which the stuff at DC that stayed the same this year, it's interesting to notice what stayed the same when you compare it with how much the company has changed since the beginning of 2020. And in that case, you can look at it as like, okay, this is like gathering for a leap. This is, we're going to keep the regular stuff the same because things might change soon and people are getting used to their jobs and they're figuring out sort of like the space that we're in. And I'm really curious to see if that stays the same or changes in 2022.
Yeah.
And if we get more of a hint of like, it's the first time Dan DiDio hasn't been in charge of the company in like, since the New 52.
Right.
And like, and that's interesting. And that's going to eventually, we're at the beginning of an era that we are going to be able to look back on, 5 years from now and go, oh, that's where it all started.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about DC is, while I would say I like more Marvel titles, and I hate to always make the comparison between Marvel and DC, but it's just, but the thing is like the thing I like about DC is I look at them and I can see a plan. And I think that that makes a big difference. And I will say that, like, I actually think that having Black Label as an option for them is very advantageous, because if you want to do something that is just outside the box, or is just like maybe a little bit more adult, or maybe is just like a little like something that's kind of fulfilling a version of the story you want to tell. I mean, even some of their digital comics are like this, like Justice League Last Ride. I haven't read it, but talking to Chip about that, it just kind of sounds like him telling the Justice League story he wants to tell without regards to continuity, which is like, that is like a cardinal sin for these companies most of the time. And now like they have these sandboxes where they can just do whatever they want, and it's resulting in really good comics. It's resulting in excellent comics. And I think that's really powerful. And I think that there's an attractiveness to seeing something and being like, I get this. Like, I get this and I want to be a part of it. And I think you're starting to see that impact. I also think, like, in regards to like the Wonder Woman stuff and the, consolidation towards like Black Label and everything, I think it's also just leaning into what works. It's like people really like what Becky and Michael are doing on Wonder Woman. And so it's just like, let's build that up. We know that Kelly Sue and Phil were doing this. Let's build that up. Let's keep building and building and building. And I think that's advantageous for everybody, because, sometimes it results in half your line being Batman, but other times it results in some really good comics or both simultaneously.
Yeah, no, I mean, like just, I'm glad somebody is finally in the chair there to be like, Wonder Woman is the best known female superhero in the world.
Right.
Why does she only have one book?
Yeah.
Like, why are we not even trying to figure out what a Wonder Woman umbrella looks like? Why is she under the Superman line? Yeah, and I think Black Label got like really like obviously there are reasons why the launch of Black Label kind of fizzled. And
what a book to launch with.
There's a reason why people got like kind of distracted at the launch of Black Label. And I think also Black Label coming on the heels of them shuttering Vertigo, like made a lot of people got a lot of people very nervous and like weird and like up in their Vertigo nostalgia about it. But Black Label's such a smart idea, and in a much more clear Black Label is a much more clear mandate than Vertigo. I think so. Where Vertigo is just like we are where DC does creator-owned comics, and sometimes they have characters from the DC universe and sometimes they don't. And are they canon? Who knows? It depends on who you ask. And Black Label, if Black Label can also be that place for, I think, as we're seeing with Nice House on a Lake, of something that has absolutely nothing to do with the DC continuity, like that's an Image book, that's like, that's a Boom book, like that's it's great that it's at DC because it's a fantastic book, and it looks great, but just the idea that like, yeah, we have a place for like. Not necessarily like grown-up versions of the DC universe, but just a version of the DC universe that you can just drop in and look at. Because I think that's one of the things that like People talk all the time about, Marvel has an edge over on DC because their universe is more grounded and DC's universe is more mythical and harder to relate to, which, like, as a DC fan, like, I don't see it, but I can understand how other people do. But I think that one thing that DC has is, I think there is a level at which Marvel's everything is canon status hamstrings those kind of experiments. And there's
agree.
a certain extent to saying this is in a parallel universe doesn't help. And it doesn't help creative ideation, and it doesn't help readers feel like they can, oh yeah, I can pick this up and it's fine, and it's not gonna, like, I'm not gonna feel like I'm missing out on something. But I just go back to the fact that, like, you talk to, that, like, if a guy's favorite Batman comic is The Dark Knight Returns, it's like, yeah, like, but you don't read Batman comics. Like, come on, man, like, you're a fake nerd. No, I don't. There's no such thing as a fake nerd. But you see what my point is that there are DC comics that are totally outside of continuity, and they can be, that's what Batman is to people, or that's what Superman is to people. And they don't have to dip into the continuity. And that's what Webtoon is.
Yeah.
Like, Webtoon isn't, people aren't really, I mean, they, like, Webtoon has monetization, but, that audience isn't there to, that comic doesn't exist to make DC a ton of money.
No.
It exists to reach people.
Right.
And to make them want to find more of these characters somewhere. And that is an easier thing to do when the ethos of continuity at your company is like, yeah, like we blow it up every 25 years anyway. So, and we bring in, and then we go back and we bring in everything that didn't used to be continuity, and we, like, pick and choose what's good.
I think 25 years is aspirational at this point, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know they've been doing, like, every 5, but I don't know. This is another tangent, but, like, even between Crisis and the New 52, there was, like, 0 Hour and and all this stuff. There's always been patch notes in between. In between the expansions.
Gotta get an update to fix that glitch we got in there. There's a
and then your patch notes introduce another problem. So now we gotta
fix Hal Jordan sending that patch.
Fucked up Power Girl's origin story. So we gotta do another one.
I do want to, before we move on to the final topic, I gotta give a quick shout out to Chris Conroy and his team of editors over at Black Label, because they're amazing.
Absolutely.
Also, I do want to say, you mentioned it, Hill House. I am, like, maybe the #1 fan of Hill House. I love Refrigerator Full of Heads.
It's great.
It's so great. I mean, like, honestly, all of the books, like, my least favorite one was probably Daphne Byrne, and that's still a comic drawn by Kelly Jones, so it's like, I'm not going to be too upset about it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I still like the idea of the imprints where, like, people have carte blanche to do stuff. I wish we saw more of that, but I kind of wonder if that period is dead. We'll see. But let's move on to the last topic for the 2021, Webtoon distribution. Yeah. I'm interested in how those two overlap for you.
Well, so, like, I touched on it a little bit talking about DC, but for me, it's about that all these sort of these experimentation. So distribution isn't just, not everybody goes to Diamond anymore, right? Distribution is how we get comics in front of people's eyeballs. And in that way, Webtoon is under that umbrella. Webtoon is under that umbrella, like the Marvel Scholastic deal is under that umbrella. Penguin Random House is under that umbrella. And it's really just like the continued, Marvel's podcasts are under that umbrella. The continued expansion of, like, ways that we get, or no, I say we, but the ways that publishers get people to look at their characters and look at these comics is just something that kept happening in 2021. And I think, much in the same way that, like, diversifying the number of ways that creators can make money is good. Diversifying the number of ways that people find comics is good. When the Webtoon announcement came out and they announced, said Wayne Family Adventures, I think is the name. I was like, I brought it into, my own work Slack, and one of my coworkers was like, "Oh, yeah, this is the only way that I know anything about Batman characters is comics that people write on Tumblr, about like how Damian Wayne is a little brat and and Batman is exhausted by Talia, like, and that's and making a comic for people who know Batman through that very specific niche of like that of people who aren't really that are like fans of Batman fanon more than they are fans of Batman canon.
Mm-hmm.
That's really smart. And for me, it goes under the same heading of like making a John Constantine graphic novel for young readers.
Johnny Constantine.
Yes. Or making Miles Morales, not even graphic novels, just prose novels for kids and putting them in Scholastic book fairs. Like this is, I don't know, it's mercantile, but like that's how kids need introductions into superhero comics these days. They can't go from the movies straight to
Single issue comics.
You can't hand a 7-year-old Karen Gillan's Eternals. Like you can't even. I don't think you could even hand a 7-year-old like Amazing Spider-Man right now, and he's about to have an anniversary. But you can hand a 7-year-old. Actually, I mean, honestly, I have no idea what age of kids belongs to what. What
8 to 12 is middle grade.
Actually, I have no idea what I'm talking about when I say like but you could hand a 7-year-old Johnny Constantine. Maybe you couldn't. I don't know. Maybe you'd have to wait until they were 11. I don't know. But yeah, I got into comics when I was 11 and I was reading Batman Year One and The Dark Knight Returns, and I don't recommend that to like anybody, and so I guess what I mean about as a trend for 2021, that continued experimentation from a ton of publishers in what are the different ways that we can get our stuff in front of, what are the different ways that we can hook people, what are the different ways that we can play to audiences that we know are interested in what we do, but are just not there for it every week. How can we get them to be there for it every week?
Related to this, I do think, so like Scott Snyder did the big Comixology Originals deal where he signed to do 8 books there. And I talked to him about it. And while I'm sure that money was certainly a factor, because money's good. Yeah, it's like you want to get paid for the work you do. One of the things that he told me that was actually, I think he said that the most attractive thing is he wanted to be on all of those platforms like, Prime reading and like Kindle Unlimited and Comixology Unlimited, where you have all these subscription people who are not necessarily going to read a comic at a comic shop, but if they see something that looks interesting, like maybe they see Tula Lote's art for Barnstormers and they're like, what is this? And they click on it, and next thing you know, they're reading a comic. Those are foots in the door. And I think that's one of the things, like what you're talking about is like all these things are building inroads to a medium that has long been considered exclusive to a lot of readers outside the medium. And I think that's always important.
Yeah, I think that the thing that the movies, that nerds should really take away from the movies is not like, we were here first or whatever, like not the sort of like, all these people who are into the movies are like poser. What you need to take away from that is that it wasn't that the stories that we were in love with about about like the loser Peter Parker, struggling in his life, or about Captain America being inspirational, or about, Batman doing dope shit. The reason we fell in love with those stories wasn't because we were nerds and we were isolated and they're only nerd stuff. They're actually universal. And the problem was that that most people actually couldn't get their hands on them.
Accessibility.
And yes, and as soon as you make that story accessible, it's huge. And that it's not, it's not that we, it's not that we were wrong and there was something weird about us that we got really deeply into these things. It's just that we managed to find it. and we managed to get hooked into it, and we had the energy to figure out that system in order to keep doing it. And that's not a badge of honor, It's not a badge of honor to like figure out, that you need a pull list. This should be easier for people. This should be as easy as getting an ebook or going on Spotify or like looking at your listings to see what movie is out or what's on Netflix today. And yeah.
I know a lot of people look at the Marvel movies and wonder why it doesn't make the comics more popular. And I mean, I think the simple answer is there's so damn many of them, it's become the text. It is the text to the people. And it's like, they don't need a replacement because there's enough there. But I do think it's interesting to look at something when you're talking about accessibility, even going back to what you said about Kaiju Max, like, where do I start?
Yeah.
I've talked to retailers who say that Invincible's animated series is one of the single most powerful sales drivers for any comic they've ever seen for an adaptation. One said it was number one basically with Batman 1989 in terms of driving interest in the comics. And I think it comes down to a simple fact. Where do you start with Invincible? You start with book one. That's it. It's super easy. And I think making things easy for people is never a problem. So I have two things I want to close with for 2022. One is about how not easy it is, which is you don't have an answer for this. I don't have an answer for this. Will the supply chain ever stop breaking? I have no idea. I mean, it's interesting because it's like we're in this position where like the comic book distribution setup is just changing dramatically. There's people say that like instead of one monopoly, there's now three monopolies, which I don't know if I necessarily agree with. But at the same time, it's like Marvel's with Penguin Random House, but you can still order through Diamond. DC's exclusively through Lunar, but you can also get their books through other, like actually I think you can get them through Penguin Random House amongst others. They're trades, not their single issues. And then there's Diamond doing their thing. And then on top of that, like supply chain is like so broken that if you wanted bags and boards for your comics, you're going to have to go on eBay and pay like twice as much. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait for months and months and months. And it's interesting because I don't know if you saw it, but NPD Bookscan said that graphic novels were up 109.3% in 2021. The thing that's amazing about that is it was so hard to get manga last year because the supply chain was so broken. What would the year have been if it wasn't broken? I mean, like we're talking about a ceiling that is several times higher than that. And it's such an important question because that talks about accessibility and that talks about how the future builds from here. And I mean, I'm not going to expect you to have an answer, but it's such an interesting topic for 2022 and 2021.
Yeah, I think it's in the same level with like conventions where it's like it's this aspect of the industry that is deeply vital to everything functioning. And there's just, I'm shrugging on the Skype video right now. I'm just doing a big like arms in the air, like
what's
nobody
happen?
knows. Nobody knows, and people have had to figure out other things, and not having it has had effects on other parts of the industry that you might not expect. And yeah, it's definitely going to continue to be an issue in 2022. You're seeing it especially in really, tiny independent publishers, just trying to get or just Kickstarters, like independent creators who are doing Kickstarters and are trying to get their books printed. And yeah, it's a nightmare, and it's probably according, I don't know. I can't remember the last time I read an article about the supply chain, so I don't know what experts are saying now, but it's as uncertain as anything.
Yeah. Absolutely. The last topic I want to bring up, which is the only one you mentioned for 2022 in our emails, and it has to be mentioned. I believe it's January 25th. Saga returns. One of our questions for 2021. My question is, what's it going to look like? I mean, what's the comeback going to look like? Are people going to return? I think they will. I know a lot of people are nervous about it, but here's my radical prediction. I think by the end of 2022, readership will be higher than it ever was for Saga. That's my hot take. And I think it's because a lot of readers for Saga are trade waiters or people who are reading the compendiums or doing all those different things. And now that it's back, I think I wouldn't be surprised if the audience for Saga has been building the entire time. that it's
Absolutely,
been gone.
yeah.
And it's going to be really fascinating to see. Are you excited?
Yeah. Or people who, heard it's coming back and are like, oh, shoot, I got to catch up.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm tremendously excited. I want to say when I was on a year ago, I put it was on my list that I was like, I don't know if this is going to happen, but I want it to happen. I want Saga to come back this year. And I was off by 1 month. And I think that's pretty good.
Yeah.
I think that's still pretty good.
Let's blame the supply chain.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can't wait for that book to come back. I'm not going on public transit right now, so I won't have to worry about reading it on the bus, which was a perennial mistake that I made back in the day. Is just opening it up and being like, oh shoot, I hope nobody saw that robot being born out of a robot vagina before I snapped the book shut. I can't wait for that book to come back. I'm really I don't know. I wrote about this when Why the Last Man came out earlier last year about that. I wrote a piece. My editor was like, we should write something about why all the men died because people are going to Google that. Do you have something that you could put in that post that would be nutritious for everyone who's Googling that? And I'm like, yeah, I'll write about how Brian K. Vaughan has clearly learned how to write a long running series with an open ending without making the reader feel like they're not getting what they wanted, what they thought they were getting when they bought into it. Mm-hmm. Which I feel like is that progression from Why the Last Man to stuff like Paper Girls and Saga, where he's very, where Saga, at the beginning of Saga, he's extremely upfront about he's like, this is not a chosen one story. This is not a story about how this war ends. This is not a story about how Hazel has a big destiny or whatever. It's just an adventure. And I'm really curious to see as sort of this being the new horizon of his career, what he does now with a finite number of issues counting down. Mm-hmm. And what he does sort of with that mandate and, the guy who's made Paper Girls and is done with it and, and has all this stuff going on. And I'm just excited to see more of Fiona Staples' work. I've missed looking at her stuff.
Yeah, me too. I'm the second that I see a Fiona Staples drawn goose, I am going to just laugh with pure joy that the world has never heard before.
And then get extremely worried that he's back in the series because then he's in danger again.
Exactly. His existence is continued danger. I will say, to bring it semi-full circle, Brian K. Vaughan is writing a Gundam movie. So
there we go.
There we go. Tokusatsu, everything. Yeah. It's all happening. Yeah. But Susana, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about this crazy world of comics and all of the things that have come and are still to come.
Here's to 2022.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with Polygon's entertainment editor, Susana Polo. You can find her on Twitter at NerdGirl, that's GERHL, and her work at Polygon. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating and review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site, Sketched, at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content and its members-only forum. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched, that's SKTCHD, following on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Patrick Coyle, Devin Fitzsimons, Joshua Corlett, Nick Walker, Isaac Warren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Narbs Studios Comics, Nicholas Palmieri, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Van de Ven, Brian, Submit Industries, Raj Patel, Jack Mulqueen, Kyle, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Elliot Metz, Dr. Lou, Scott Hazelwood, Scott Buwan, Michael Tunk, Canadian by Proxy, Johnny Cannon, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susana Polo, Reed Hinckley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Salates, Akil Wilson, Alex Demetriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Brendan Fletcher, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics Star in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.